Hi, this is Craig Stocks here for Utah Desert Remote Observatories. You can find us online at utahdesertremote.com. And today I want to talk about the part of my workflow that comes at the tail end, and in fact usually gets glossed over or skipped over. And that's doing final work, touch-up, and exporting images in Lightroom. If you have Photoshop, you also have Lightroom. So let's look at how it works. So if you're familiar with my workflow, you know that I start in PixInsight. So we'll just very quickly walk through how to get to Lightroom, or at least how I get there. I start in PixInsight, and here I've got an image of the flaming star nebula, and I have three versions that I've created in PixInsight. I've got the starless hydrogen alpha, I have RGB, and then I also have the stars from the RGB image that were extracted using Star Exterminator. And each one of these gets saved as a 16-bit TIFF, and since they're already stretched, 16-bit is fine. The reason I do the RGB combination in PixInsight is so that I can use the spectrophotometric color calibration, and that gets the stars, and it just gives some good tools for working with astronomical color before I get into Photoshop, where I work with, I'll call it more artistic color. So these would get saved as a 16-bit TIFF. In Photoshop, I would go to File, Scripts, and Load Files into Stack. And what that lets me do, here we go, Load Files into Stack. What that does is it loads each individual file as a layer in the layer stack. That's where that stack business comes from. And after processing it, I might wind up with something that looks like this, where I have the star group on top. And if you've watched my videos, you've seen this many times. We have the HA layer down here, and that's in screen blending mode with just the red channel turned on. So it's just adding red. Any place there was hydrogen alpha. And then at the bottom, we have the RGB layer. And I would probably rotate this 180 degrees because to me this looks upside down. So I'll just go to image rotation and 180 degrees. And that just flips it over. So to me that looks more right and more balanced. Once I'm done, or at least temporarily done, working with it in Photoshop, I would go to File, Save As, and I save all my finished images by year. So I have a 2023 photos folder, and because these get so large because of all the different layers, and this is a 62 megapixel camera and the files are all in 16-bit depth, I save these as the large document format. That's Photoshop's format for things bigger than 2 gigabytes. So I would save this as Flaming Star, let's just call it Flaming Star Example. And that's saved in my 2023 photos. And now that that's saved, I can close this, and let's pop over to Lightroom. I use Lightroom to control and keep track of all of my images. So I can look down here along what's called the film strip and see some of the different images. But we just saved a new image to this 2023 photos folder, and you can see on the right that that's currently the folder that I have selected in this little Explorer window, where you can explore the various folders that you have introduced Lightroom to. Lightroom calls it import, but what you're really doing is telling Lightroom, here's a picture I want you to know about, and I want you to keep track of it. We're going to work with it. We'll change some settings. Lightroom never actually ingests the image. It's not really part of Lightroom. It's just that Lightroom knows where it is and knows some things about it. And one of the reasons that's important is you want to be careful that once you have an image kind of in the Lightroom universe, you don't want to change it, move it to a different folder or something outside of Lightroom, because then Lightroom doesn't know where you've moved it to. So In order to tell Lightroom there's a new picture there, what we'll do is just right-click on the folder here that says 2023 Photos, and I'm going to choose Synchronize Folder. And what that's going to do is have Lightroom go through this folder and see if there's any new photos it doesn't know about. And after the first time, the first of the year when I load the first images in, from then on, this is the technique I use on a daily basis. So we'll synchronize folder, and there's a couple options here. I want to import new photos, and I do not want to remove missing photos. And the reason I don't want to remove those, Lightroom keeps a nice catalog with somewhat high resolution thumbnails of every image that it has gotten to know. And even if I delete those photos off of the hard drive, if I delete them outside of Lightroom, I know I just said don't do that, but if I delete them outside of Lightroom, Lightroom still keeps it in its catalog and still keeps the thumbnail. So most of these images that we're looking at here aren't actually available on my hard drive anymore. They're on a backup drive, but I can scan through in Lightroom and find the photo I'm looking for, so then I know what photo I need off of my backup drive. So I don't want to remove missing photos from the catalog, and then just click Synchronize. And these are sticky options, by the way, so once you choose one, it'll be there as the default the next time. So click Synchronize, and it's going to go through that folder, 2023 Photos, and apparently there are 2 photos there that it has not met yet. So it's going to import those, and it will automatically switch the view to just the most recently imported photos. So here are the 2 that it just imported, and right now we're viewing just the most recent import. And I can double click on one of these, and that will bring it kind of front and center. So there it is, full screen, and we're basically looking at this image in the composite view the way we were seeing it in Lightroom with all the various layers turned on and off. So it's actually saved with a composite full-scale preview, and that's what we're looking at here in Lightroom. Now, Lightroom has some very powerful editing tools, and in fact it has the same editing tools that you have in the Camera Raw filter in Photoshop. I find it more convenient to work with some of the final touch-ups in Lightroom rather than in Camera Raw. You can certainly do it either way for the most part, but there are a lot of other things that you'll see that Lightroom does for me, and one of them I already touched on. It keeps a catalog of all of my images. And if I look at the statistics up here, it has 287,000 photographs in its catalog right now. So that's something you can't do with Photoshop, is keep track of 287,000 photos. When I'm looking at this image now, if I decide, well, I want to process this a little bit more, maybe add some contrast, and for astrophotos, I always work on a black background, or most of the time, so that I can see if there's a difference between the black of the sky and a pure black background. So to develop this, right now we're in the library module. And typically in the library module, I have to move me out of the way here, you're either going to look at it in what's called loop view, which is what we're looking at now, or grid view, where you see whatever images are currently available to you in that folder. And then those same images will also show up in the film strip along the bottom. If I want to further tweak this, similar to what you would do in the Camera Raw filter, I can just choose the Develop module. And I think I've mentioned before, one of the things I never crop my data until I'm done with it. So I know that's contrary to just about all the other advice you hear. Everybody always tells you in PixInsight, the first thing you need to do is crop your image using the dynamic crop tool. I don't do that. I leave ragged edges and so forth, all those exposed, because I'm going to ultimately work with the stretch, fine-tuning the stretch and the levels in Photoshop, and I don't want to crop it until I have it completely done and I know how I want to use it, because I may do 2 or 3 different crops of the same image. So here's the image that we just brought in from Photoshop, and typically the first thing I'll find is I didn't pull the darks down quite as dark as I want to. So in the Develop module, in the Basic tab, I'll grab the black slider and darken it down just a little bit, but I still want to see some separation between the background and the black border around it. I might, if I look at the histogram, I can see my whites aren't really pushed all the way over, so we're not using the full range of tones available to us. So I'll brighten the whites a little bit and maybe even pop the highlights a little bit. If I want to tweak the color a little, I might add a little bit more yellow to get rid of some of that neon red that you sometimes get. We have this blue-gray reflection nebula here, right by the brightest star. If I want to really highlight that, I can go to the color mixer tool and choose point color, choose this color sampler tool and choose that color, and then we can brighten it up. Maybe we want to change the hue to make it more blue. So basically whatever kind of fine-tuning you want to do, focus just on that as basically as a color range. This is where I would finally crop it. The tool right here is the crop overlay, and we have some presets. We can crop it keeping its original size, and then if I pull a corner you can see it keeps that same aspect ratio. I could do a 16:9 if I wanted to use this for the wallpaper on my computer, and let's say that's what we want to do. So maybe I would crop it like that, and that would be my 16:9 crop. And let's see if there's anything else. We could maybe give it a touch of clarity. I think I'll darken it just a little bit. Keep the brights nice and bright. And at this point, let's say we're happy with that. So now how do I get it into something that's usable? Well, in Lightroom, I mentioned you import photos, and that is looking at this original image. It hasn't changed it. All we've done is we've kind of, think of this as an adjustment layer. We have overlaid adjustments on top of that original image. The original image is still perfectly intact, has not been changed by Lightroom. If I want to create a, let's say a 1920 by 1080 wallpaper image, what I would do is go back to the library module, and then I would choose export. And export is how you convert a complete image into a derivative that you can do something with, such as to post online or to use as a wallpaper, or save it as a high-resolution image to print. And I have a lot of what Lightroom calls presets, might be called something else in other programs, but I have a whole bunch of different saved settings, and one of them is a wallpaper. This happens to be 2560 wide, and it's going to save it in my Photos wallpaper folder. And it's sizing it to 2560 pixels wide at 90 pixels per inch, although that doesn't really matter. It's saving it in the sRGB color space as a JPEG and at a 90 level of quality. It's applying some screen sharpening, and we're not adding a watermark. So if I click export, now it's finally going to take that Photoshop file that we just worked with. It's going to process whatever other things we've done, such as the crop or the contrast or the color that we played with in here in Lightroom. And now, if I open my Windows Explorer and go to my wallpaper, and there is the file that we just exported. It's in my wallpapers folder. We could look at it. We could choose to make it the wallpaper background. And I might look at this and say, gosh, I'd like to increase the color saturation of the stars. I kind of say I missed that in my processing early on. So not a problem. What I'll do is come back into Lightroom, This is the image that we just worked on, and this is the Lightroom view of the image. So remember we've cropped the image for Lightroom, we've made some other changes, but I want to go back and edit the original. So to do that, I'll just, and there's a lot of ways you can get to it, but I'll just right click here on the image and choose Edit In, and I'm going to edit in Adobe Photoshop. And remember, if you have Photoshop, you also have Lightroom. And from the pop-up, I want to choose Edit Original. And again, that's a sticky setting, so that'll be there as the default choice the next time. Here's the file in Photoshop, just the way we saved it from Photoshop, without anything done to it in Lightroom. We can go to our stars layer here. I can add a hue saturation, and let's bump up the saturation of the stars. Other than the red, I find red tends to get too saturated, so we'll pull it down. And while we're here, let's make the stars even a little bit smaller. So we'll adjust something like that. So we've made 2 adjustments here. Let's sharpen the image too. Let's go to our RGB layer, and I'm going to convert this. This is the pixel layer of RGB. I'm going to convert it to a smart object, and I'm going to apply the Smart Sharpen. So now we have sharpened the RGB layer. And let's do the same thing to the hydrogen alpha layer. So again, I'll go to the hydrogen alpha. I'll convert this to a smart object. And we'll go to the Smart Sharpen filter and apply that. And this is a good illustration of working iteratively back and forth between Lightroom and Photoshop, because now we've made these changes in Photoshop, and I will now close this image. And when I try to close it, it'll ask, do I want to save it before closing? And I'll say yes, I do want to save these changes. So it's saving this image, and as soon as it's done, it will close. If we go back to Lightroom now, what we'll find is those changes we just made are now reflected in this version that we're looking at. So we've made some updates in Photoshop that gets reloaded into Lightroom, and we're now looking at the updated version of the Photoshop file with our Lightroom development settings, just like we had before. And again, if we want to tweak any of these, maybe we want to adjust detail here a little bit so we can play with our sharpening. Maybe we want some noise reduction here. Whatever it is you feel like you want to do. Interesting, I find negative texture tends to make little stars smaller. Positive clarity tends to bring out the structure in the nebula. So we've made some updates now. Let's update our wallpaper image. So we'll go back to the library module by clicking here at the top. I'll choose Export, and by default we're still on the same preset that we just used, which is wallpaper. I'll click Export, and it's going to ask me, this time it's going to say, hey, there's already a file there by that name. Do you want to overwrite it, or do you want to use a unique name? So I can overwrite it, which is typically what I would do, and it would just update this with our new version of the image. And now when we look at Windows Explorer, we will see that we've got the new version that we just created as soon as the export's done. I'm making the computer work hard by doing the screen capture at the same time we're running all of this. So there is our new version of the Flame Nebula saved for my wallpaper. But let's say I want to post this online. And for this, I want to use a different crop. So let's go back to the Develop module. Now I can, maybe I want to save both crops and have both available. I can right-click down here on the thumbnail and choose Create Virtual Copy. Now, remember I said Lightroom doesn't actually do something with the image, it just references it. So now we have two independent references to that same Photoshop file that we created. And they're independent references and can have independent settings. So on this one, let's go to the crop tool and let's change it to an 8:10 aspect ratio. And let's crop it like that. And let's save this to post to Facebook. So again, I'll go to Export, but instead of using my preset that I have for a wallpaper, I'll use the preset that I use for posting to Facebook. And this is going to post to my website JPEGs folder. It's going to make it 1920 pixels wide. But this time it's also going to add our Utah Desert Remote Observatory's logo as a watermark. Click Export, and let's go back to Windows Explorer. And we'll go to that JPEGs, and there is the image that we just exported. So there is that same image, but now cropped to a 4:5 aspect ratio, 1920 pixels wide, and with the logo at the bottom. If I want to print it, I would just open it as a full resolution image and print it directly from Photoshop. You can also print directly from Lightroom, and it's actually a very good print module if you do your own printing. There's lots of other options here, just really too many to go over in a brief video. There's you could do a whole series of videos just on Lightroom, but I'm sure someone will say, well, I can do that with the Photoshop Camera Raw filter. And yes, the develop settings you can do with Camera Raw, but that doesn't give you the full image library management tool that I've got here. I mentioned I have 200 and some thousand images in this catalog. I have another catalog that goes back even further with close to 1 million images. And that has images back to 2005 or thereabouts, plus some that I've scanned from film even earlier than that, back to around 2000. So usually I don't talk a lot about the Lightroom portion of my workflow, but for me it's an integral part. When I'm done with Photoshop, pretty much every image gets saved usually to this annual folder, and then synchronized so that the file's available within Lightroom, and then I do my final tweaking, edits, crop, and then export from Lightroom into the derivative files that I'm going to use to post online or put on the website, put on Facebook, email, print, whatever. That's where I get the actual files that I'm going to use. And the original Photoshop file never really gets changed or touched from that master file version that has all of the layers still intact. Hope you found this useful. If you have any questions, drop them in the comments below. And as always, I hope you have a great day today and an even better night tonight under a clear, dark sky. Thanks.